You have an annual review every year where they...
I tell you what, since I retired, something came up, and on the company phone, they have a phone and the computer and stuff, and I'm talking to them. It went down, had to come back up. They said, "Well, who's your supervisor?" And I said, "I don't have the slightest idea."
That's a good question.
And it took about a half an hour to determine who is on paper.
Yeah.
And it can't be Rob because of nepotism. Mm-hmm. So they had somebody on hold over here, and they called them, and they didn't know they were my supervisor.
That's awesome.
And we've been doing this for, 7 years now, 6.5 years I'm retired.
Yeah.
And he's like, Bill, I'm going to need a quarterly report from you. Like,
yeah, right. That's coming. That's good. That's good.
This episode of Bourbon Pursuit is made possible through listeners like you, supported through Patreon. Hey everyone, welcome back to another brand new episode of Bourbon Pursuit. And as usual, we've got some news that we would love to go through first before we get kicked off with the episode. Now, we've been talking about it for a while. The bands have been announced. Bourbon Beyond is making its second appearance here in Louisville, Kentucky. You got Lenny Kravitz, you got John Mayer, you got Sting, you got Sheryl Crow, and you've got Bourbon Pursuit. You've got Blake from Bourboner, you've got Fred Minnick, you've got Brian from Sippin' Corn. There's all kinds of bourbon personalities going to be there from every single distillery, so you've got to go get your tickets. We've got our affiliate link available on our Twitter handle as well as on Facebook, and you know what, I'll go ahead and put it on the website too. So if you want to get your tickets to Bourbon and Beyond, make sure you go to bourbonpursuit.com, use our affiliate link. I swear we don't get any kickbacks. This is just an opportunity for us to be able to show that we're helping drive some audience and getting people there to the greatest bourbon festival that there's ever going to be. I mean, this thing's going to be huge. Bourbon Pursuit, we're going to be there doing 2 of the workshops. We've got one talking about the rarest whiskey in the world, doing private barrel selections with Larry Rice, Danny Wimmer, Drew Colesveen, and Jane Bowie. We've also got another session called The Audacity of Source Whiskey, featuring John Foster, Josh Quinn, Marianne Barnes, and maybe a few other special guests that'll be there. We'll see what happens. So tickets are on sale now. Go to bourbonpursuit.com, use our link on the banner there, and go and get your tickets. And there's also going to be another advertisement during the Midroll, so if you want to learn more about it, make sure you go check it out there too. Patreon shipments are continuing to go out this week. As usual, we're going to be continuing to keep putting these out as much as we can. I know we're getting a little slow on some of these. It's just there's a lot of them to get caught up on, but I promise we will get them to you and you will get all your stuff. All the $10 ones have gone out. Now we're hitting the $5 ones. The update now we have, so our barrel-aged beer that we've been talking about, we collaborated with Third Turn Brewing here in Louisville, Kentucky, and it was actually on Tuesday this week. I was actually able to go to Third Turn and be able to take our Imperial Aged Stout that is going in at 12.2%, and it's going to gain an extra few percents as it's sitting there aging in the barrel over the next few months here. So there's going to be it's going to be a delicious beer. All right, I'm going to tell you right now, it's going to be awesome. There is actually we filled 2 different barrels. We had the Bourbon Community Roundtable Buffalo Trace barrel that we filled, as well as an additional Heaven Hill barrel that we came across that we filled that as well. And there was some remaining, and so that's actually going to go on tap soon at Third Turn. And I'm going to make sure that I post that for anybody that's here in the Louisville area that wants to go check it out. Make sure you follow us on all those social media sites and you can get those updates. I'll continue to give updates about this barrel-aged beer project as we continue to go along, when it's going to be available, when we're going to have a tap night, when we're going to be there, and when you can get your own bottles as well. It's Derby season around here, and Woodford Reserve is back as another proud supporter and presenter of the Kentucky Derby, and they have announced their 2018 $1,000 Mint Julep Cup and Recipe, and this year's experience is presented under the theme of Best of Kentucky. It was crafted by Woodford Reserve's newly appointed Assistant Master Distiller Elizabeth McCall, as well as Master Distiller Chris Morris, who have both been guests on the show before. All proceeds from the $1,000 Mint Julep Cup are benefiting the Jennifer Lawrence Arts Foundation. Talking about today's episode, I'm really surprised that it's taken this long to get Bill Samuels on the show. He's one of the funniest quirkiest, and almost one of the. He's a really honest guy in bourbon too. And he's a great character, and he's definitely one of those great legends that, wasn't necessarily in the distilling business, right? He was in the marketing business, he was in the selling business, and he really helped grow this to where it is today. He took his father's dream and really made it into a global and recognized brand. So today's episode is a real treat. And if you want to check out all the Maker's Mark episodes that we've done before, you can actually go to our website at bourbonpursuit.com. There's a tab at the very top, and you can actually sort every episode by a current distillery. And of course, Maker's is on there. So go check that out. Remember, if you like what you hear, please support us on Patreon. We've had a lot of new signups coming on recently, and maybe that's in anticipation for another barrel pick announcement we have going on. I'm not too sure, but it hasn't started leaking out yet. But we have bottle totes, we got patches, we got T-shirts, and we've got barrel picks. We're going to be doing hopefully 4 to 6, maybe 8 a year. We'll see what happens, but having access through Patreon is how you do it. So make sure you go and you check out patreon.com/bourbonpursuit and help support this show. As usual, follow us on all those great social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, to get updates on everything about what we're drinking and maybe the barrel aged stuff as well for the beer. There's going to be a lot of cool things that are going to be coming. Subscribe to us on all the ways that you can get access to these episodes on iTunes, YouTube, Facebook. Keep those iTunes reviews coming in. I can't tell you how awesome it is to be able to see all of the honest reviews that come through there, whether they're good or bad. We take a lot of that to heart, and we try to make every episode better and better as we continue to go along. And it's feedback that really gets that happening. And really, I think when we see a lot of those 5-star reviews of people that love the episodes and they love our guests, it really helps cement a lot of things that we're doing. So thank you for continuing to do that. And as usual, go to bourbonpursuit.com, subscribe on to us for email, and get every new episode in your inbox, 7 a.m. every Thursday morning. 7 a.m. Eastern, by the way. But with that, enjoy this week's episode. Welcome back to another episode of Bourbon Pursuit, the official podcast of bourbon. Today, Kenny and Ryan are here. We're not actually in Loretto. We are in Louisville, but we are at the offices where we have actually interviewed this man's son on the program before. It was, it had been at least 50 episodes ago or longer than that.
Yeah, and he must make you nervous. You fumbled on your intro.
No,
so we had to
You're right off the box.
Yeah.
I'd never do that. I'm usually on my game today, right?
Yeah, well, it should. He's one of the icons of the history. You think of Bill Samuels and Maker's Mark, it's like the most iconic brand and name in the industry.
Mm-hmm. And I love coming to anything with Maker's Mark because you get to see a lot of the cool artwork and the things that have been done through the design agency they've used. It's just I'm always taken away by how good it really is, right? Because even today I was actually driving along. I know we're recording this around Christmas time, might come out a little bit later, but there was a good one that had an old Woody with a Maker's Mark bottle strapped to the top of it, right? Yeah. And it's like it even has that Christmas feel to it.
Yeah, I love those. I remember the ones on the Spaghetti Junction said like low and slow, like the spaghetti, made slow and slow, like the Spaghetti Junction, or like, there's just tons of them that are like, they have the best ad agency ever.
I know, it's good. But, we're not going to talk too much about the ads today. We're gonna talk about the man behind the brand, the man who helped, build it to where it is today. And, maybe he's playing the links a little bit, getting out some golfing in his retirement too. So.
Not too much. Not too much.
So today on the show, we've got Bill Samuels. Bill is the chairman emeritus of Maker's Mark. He also just likes to be that cranky old man they call Bill at the Louisville office.
He just want to be called retired.
Yeah, retired. Yeah. He's probably got platinum or diamond status on Delta. He's probably all over the place. So, Bill, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks. Good to be here.
So, we talk a lot on the show about people and where they come from, and that's kind of what we want to do with this because, we had Rob on the show, and Rob kind of talked about where he came from and how he kind of grew up in the ranks. He came from you. Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah. But how he kind of came up in the ranks. And so I kind of want to get your side of the story, right? So how did you, how are you following either in your dad's footsteps or, part of the just being a part of the distillery and stuff like that. So kind of trace us through that part of history.
Well, I'm the only one that's been through 2 executive transitions in the company. Dad and I had the first one, and then Rob and I had the second one. Rob and I are much more alike. That was pretty simple, and we had a going concern. Back with me, I grew up when we were out of business, and Dad had gotten out of the Navy and was going to retire and work the farm and just kind of take it easy, and that got in the way of Mom's plans a little bit. He was underfoot, so she kept suggesting he get a job, and he never did really want a job after he got out of the service. But he always did want to see if he could improve dramatically on the family whiskey, and in a sense, it was a good time to do it because it was in the pits. Mm-hmm. Bourbon was really low, being replaced by Scotch whiskeys. Vodkas were coming on, California wines, and bourbon pretty much was at its end game. And it looked like from the outside in that, well, who's going to shut the lights off? Distilleries were going out of business, one every 3 or 4 weeks. Opportunity. There's not much you can do with a distillery except make whiskey. Mm-hmm. And so Dad was able to find the one he wanted to experiment, and that's what it was. It was his retirement hobby for $35,000. And that little place has become the epicenter of bourbon tourism and is where every drop of America's iconic Maker's Mark is made. And it all started because Mom wanted his rear end out of the house. Just go do something. And he was able to pick up a facility. It was run down, but he was a Depression baby, so he knew how to make a nickel work. Mm-hmm. And got her fixed up, got started, and had some good help from the other a number of the other distillers to help him figure out how to make the kind of whiskey he was looking for. And he just paid attention to what he was doing, didn't pay too much attention in the marketplace. Mom would dip in occasionally and rescue him, like designing the package and helping fix the place up and all. But, I mean, he was fat and happy. And then it got disrupted when I came.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, because he was the craftsman, right?
Yeah, very much so.
You're like, you said, kind of the entrepreneur or whatever. You said you clashed. Did y'all butt heads?
Well, it was...
So different philosophies?
Doe Anderson rescued us because we danced around the fact that we saw the world differently and communicated differently and had a very different sense of urgency and all of that. And I forgot to realize this was his hobby and not mine. And that created a little angst. But what really made it work was we finally decided to hire an agency not to do ads, but to teach me how to do my job.
Okay.
And we really got lucky early. Brought in Doe Anderson, who in Louisville, who we still have, and they're still doing marvelous work. And a fellow named Jim Lindsay got attached to me, and he was a young marketing guy, whiz bang, and he was going to teach me how to do marketing. And he decided, and I agreed with him, that what we really needed to do is to try to find out what was on Dad's mind, because he preferred doing his thing rather than telling us what exactly he had in mind for this little brand of his.
Read between the lines, right?
Yeah.
That's what he wants you to do.
He wanted us to figure it out, but he didn't want us to misinterpret.
He didn't give you a manual?
He didn't want to write the manual.
Yeah.
So
just tribal knowledge.
Jim Lindsay and I, mainly him, figured out how to get in his head and ask him a whole bunch of open-ended questions that we were able to put together, which defined his baby, what it was, brand personality, the tone and the style of communications, if he was going to feel comfortable with them, who the customer might be, what they might look like. And I don't think Dad ever really knew what we were doing, but it gave us an opportunity to figure out what the hell he had on his mind, and then try to figure out what we could add to it that wasn't totally disruptive and in the opposite direction.
Sorry, go.
That was the key to everything.
what was his original vision? Was it just of the company? Was it what
Well-
it is today, or did you all have to help him get there? Or
Well, I don't know that we have to. I think he'd have been very happy creating the world's best whiskey, then retiring and shutting the door. I really do. And that might be an oversimplification, because the fact is all our customers were in Kentucky for the first 25 years. And he loved it because he ran into a bunch of them, and they all loved what he was doing. And that was that's a big ego boost. And that's,
Well, it's the
that was the
technician's
satisfaction.
mindset,
It was the technician's mindset. And our job was to figure out how we could add it. Would there be any way that he could tolerate that would allow us to try to commercialize in an appropriate way his vision and his baby? The first thing we had to figure out was how did he see the baby? Mm-hmm. And that was one of the brain farts we had. Rather than ask him to describe the baby, we went and asked his 3 best friends to describe him. And then we got him to approve it. He said, "Wow, you got it right the first time." We never told him that what we had described was him.
Yeah, that's funny.
And this was his little bit, and that got us off to a really good start.
This sort of reminds me of like a family recipe of like pasta sauce, and then all of a sudden, like somebody's like, "Oh, you should go bottle this and go sell it," right? Like it's kind of like
It's a little bit like that. It is.
Kind of. I don't know if you're familiar with the show The Prophet on CNBC. He invests in, but there's this
I am.
lady that had a
Yeah,
biscuit
it's fabulous.
company out in South Carolina, and he's like, "We got to take these biscuits global," and she's like, but we got to tweak it a little bit so we can sell it in stores and have it. And she's like, she's the technician. She's like, "No way, no, we're not messing with
little
it."
bit of freaking out.
Yeah.
Sounds like Dad.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's what it reminds me of. Yeah. But now it sells everywhere, and was a good decision.
I mean, you had said that the original investment, his retirement, was $35,000. I mean, that's kind of a lot back then, right? I mean, that's today you're looking into
that wasn't the investment. That was the investment to buy the facility.
Yeah,
and it wasn't quite operational. But where he tricked Mom was the real investment was he was going to have a number of years before he had anything to sell. So the working capital that would be required for just grain and barrels and energy and people and all was way over $1 million just to make one batch a week. Mm-hmm. And it was one small batch of 18 barrels a week.
Was he able to get that from investors, or was it self-funded?
It was self-funded for about the first 6.5 years. When he went on the market, there was a little initial response which gave the banks enough confidence.
Right.
It wasn't much. It was all in Louisville, to be honest with you, and that allowed him. Once he got the working capital up to $1 million, he had about all we had in the family in the hobby, and he was beginning to have enough confidence that there might be a few customers that would want to buy some. But they had to find us. There wasn't any chasing them, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think, was he really betting the farm at that point, or was you had said he was just kind of like a retirement hobby, but it sounds like it was kind of all in at one point.
Well, now I was off. I was in school, high school, then college, and then working in the aerospace industry, and all. As this was going on, I know Mom was nervous as a whore in church because there wasn't the lifestyle that there had been before. So in that sense, it did crimp things quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I'm a small business owner myself, and we're having our 10th year anniversary, and like I stress over like $1,000 decisions, but like I couldn't imagine $1 million decisions. What was it like? In those early days, like you have this vision of where you want to go, but you got to make these decisions, and you're like, how do you make those? And
well, let me tell you what the banker, who was one of his best friends and who he asked to serve on the board and couldn't do it because he knew he wouldn't be able to get any money out of the bank. The way the banker explained it to Dad is he had this wonderful idea and how he was going to make this wonderful whiskey. Now remember, this is back in the early 50s. And the banker told him, Bill, I have been working for 5 years on this new strand of Brussels sprouts. And they're wonderful, and they're just now coming to perfection. I'll get you some. Well, he knew my father couldn't stand Brussels sprouts. So Dad said, well, I don't want that. And the man said, that's your problem. People have already decided they don't like bourbon. They're not going to be interested in a better tasting one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He said, it ain't going to work. And if it hadn't worked in Kentucky, it never would have worked anywhere.
Yeah, sure as shit wouldn't have worked anywhere else.
No, and think about how few things of style and fashion start here and emanate outward.
I would think it'd go the other way. Usually style and fashion starts in New York or California and works their way inward, right?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Never here and other way.
Yeah.
So this, I mean, the odds of us being able to commercialize it outside of Kentucky were not good. Mm-hmm. Even though the whiskey was great and it was getting great reviews and all, and everybody loved it in Kentucky, and they're all talking about it and taking it to friends like Coors Beer was back in the early 60s.
Yeah. So talk about like the next stage in life for you right here. So you had mentioned that, this was kind of all going on in high school. And then talk about a little bit aerospace. Like what were you doing in aerospace at the time? And where'd you go to college? What was your next job out of there?
Well, Jim Beam taught me or convinced me to go to engineering school. He was our next door neighbor when I was a kid and my grandfather's best friend, wonderful man. And Dad was an engineer, and I was pretty good in math and science in high school, not so good in anything else. And so I went off to Case Institute of Technology, which is now Case Western Reserve up in Cleveland. And almost the day our freshman class arrived, Eisenhower created NASA.
Oh, yeah.
And they took the president from Case to be the first director of NASA, to put it together. But he never left. He took a leave of absence. So we were pretty hyped up at Case. We were, I guess, one of, if not the first, of the engineering schools to go all in for the aerospace initiatives. Mm-hmm. And he pretty much promised all of us that if we would go that route, he'd have a job for us, or he'd get us in graduate school, get us fellowships and
that was an easy decision, right? Yeah, sure. Going to space, you got it. Checkbox, right? Let's do this.
It was all in. And it was absolutely fabulous. So after Case, I went out to Berkeley to graduate school, thanks to T. Keith Glennon, the president of Case, who had all these connections and was still the head of NASA. And while there, worked for Aerojet General as a research engineer and helped design the Polaris missile thrust ejection nozzle for the second stage Polaris, and did some work on the Gemini project also. Those are the two I spent most of my time on. And then it became pretty obvious as more better young people came into the industry that some of us C students weren't long for it. And that's when I started looking for an alternative and called my father, and I was the last thing he wanted at that point in time.
Really? Why's that?
Well, I'm a little disruptive, and he was having fun, and this was in the early '60s, and he was getting pretty good reviews, and was getting a lot of local action here in Louisville and Lexington and around, and and that provided enough money for him to keep the smokestacks operating and all. Still making his one batch a week, 18 barrels.
Yeah.
Gosh, it's hard to imagine. And so we reached an agreement, I guess would be the best way to put it, is if I would go to law school and get unengineered for a while, that we give it a try.
Why unengineered? Did he just think you were going to?
No, he felt, and I think rightfully so, he felt that if I was going to be effective, I had to be much more of a generalist and much less of a specialist.
Yeah.
He was absolutely right. So the law school helped. The summer internship in the White House helped. Working in the patent office summer helped.
A summer internship in the White House? Had we missed that part?
Well, the White House intern program started with Lyndon Johnson. It was just a summer program. It did not start with Monica Lewinsky.
Okay.
It was just a summer program, and
you're full of good jokes today.
Every U.S. senator got one pick.
Yeah.
So there were 100 of us that came, and there were only 2 that were not in high school. And so the other fellow and I, he was in law school also. So he and I got bored with all the giddiness and all. So he said, I've got I've got a friend of mine over in the patent office. Wouldn't it be fun to work there? And I'm thinking, oh, 2 engineering degrees, this law school, this is be good. So we went over and visited with Mr. Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt Jr. was the Secretary of Commerce. So we just walked right in his office and told him how bored we were about to be in the White House, and could he help us out? We liked the idea of having all the social events that the interns got, but we didn't care too much about the daytime activities. So he put us to work for Commissioner Brennan in the patent office, and he worked us to death, but it was absolutely fabulous experience.
That's real cool.
And I was pretty much focused on that becoming a career, not to whiskey. I'd kind of walked away from that. And as I was...
it could have been your dad's like underlying motto.
Was he like, thank God,
well,
he took the bait.
He didn't discourage me. Let's put it that way. He didn't discourage me. And then there was an intervention. And the intervention was very subtle. It started about the 3rd day I was in law school at Vanderbilt. Because right across, if you go down the back steps of the Vanderbilt Law School, you cross 21st Street and you go in this pretty ugly white 6-story building that Jack Daniels had their offices in. And my father's good friend, Hap Motlow, was the chairman. So I was ordered to go see Hap when I got to school. And Hap became my Friday entertainment for 3 years.
Okay.
It was unbeknownst to me at the time. It was my introduction to the industry. It was my initial education about the industry. And Mr. Motlow was he was Jack Daniels' great nephew. If you know the Jack Daniels bottle, it says Lem Motlow, proprietor, right on the front of the label. It was his father.
Okay.
So when Mr. Lem retired, it went to one of the older brothers, and then Hap had it in the mid-'60s when I was down there, all through the 60s and early 70s. So I really got interested in the business, not from my father, but from Jack Daniels. And matter of fact, it was so subtle, I didn't know what he was doing, and I had accepted a job at the Bendix Corporation up in South Bend to work in their patent department. Was really excited about it. And Hap had bought me dinner every Friday for 3 years. So I come back, I said, Hap, we're going to dinner. I got something to tell you, and I'm buying. That was my first offer to buy dinner. And I told him about my job, and he got this nasty look on his face. He said, no. He said, son, you're going to have to call them up and tell them you're not coming. He said, I've been putting up with you for 3 years, and you're going to go back and work 1 year for your father, and then you go do what you want to. Take the bar before you go, so you've got that option out of the way. And I did. I graduated, took the bar in Tennessee, went up to Kentucky on reciprocity, and was ready to give a half-ass attempt at this Maker's Mark thing just because I had so much affection for Hap. I mean, I just adored the guy. And so that was 50 years ago, 5 months ago.
Wow.
So It's been 50 years and 5 months. So, and I can't say Rob had the same excitement coming to work with me.
Did you make him go to 3 different schools as well?
I'm just a little tougher. Dad, everything's easy with him. You know, it's fun as long as you didn't mess up his craft.
Yeah.
And that was the lesson. Just don't mess the craft up. Have a good time. And if you find people that want to buy what you're doing outside of Kentucky, that's okay, but don't push it on them.
Yeah. What was it during that year that made you want to stick with it and stay on? How was the experience in there? Like, this is what I want to do.
It was, the first thing was, it was a lot of fun. The frustration was that I didn't bring anything to the table. I mean, the last thing we needed was somebody designing rocket nozzles in Loretta. Now there's the kinship between the rocket fuel, but not the nozzles. So I didn't bring much to the table, and Dad could see a little bit of frustration there, and so that's when we brought in the agency, trying to figure out, and we did some personality testing to see what would be the best fit, and that was money well spent. So it really took about 9.
Was that on the advice of the advertising agency?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. And that's when we learned about each other. We learned about ourselves, and why communication wasn't as easy. It's just we saw the world a bit differently. He saw process. I saw hard charging action.
You saw rocket nozzles. Yeah. And then, so what was that initial foray into it, right? I mean, you took these personality tests, try to figure out where do you actually fit into this puzzle? Where did you fit in this puzzle?
Well, it was clear that at this time, bourbon was in the tank. We didn't have any money to do marketing.
And this is what we need to do. We need to hire another person
No.
with a law degree.
No, we actually found a slot. It just wasn't a well-groomed slot.
Okay.
The slot was that there are some personalities that are really good at making rock soup.
I'm listening. I have no idea what you're talking about.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah.
Making something out of nothing.
Okay.
And out of Kentucky, this was nothing. Mm-hmm. It's the last thing anybody wanted. So it wasn't that the skill set was there, but the personality test indicated that what we had to do had to be very unconventional, okay? And we had to have enough confidence in what we were doing in the early stages, even though it didn't make any sense, and had the tenacity to push through the walls. Mm-hmm. And we got a lot of walls in this industry because of the 3-tier system and all the rest of it. And then I had the blessing or the benefit of having the agency, Doe Anderson, and their talent, and they understood their role was to figure out how we can take Dad's baby out of Kentucky and do it in a way that he really felt comfortable with.
What was that first step to take it out of Kentucky?
It was that exercise. Well, the first thing we had to do, we had to find out what made him comfortable. The summary of that was his idea of a marketing strategy was sit on a rock and wait to be discovered.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay? And after our exercise, Doe Anderson and myself, Jim Lindsay, we believe there was an opening to move that sitting on a rock to maybe getting permission from him to manage the discovery process. Okay? And so we went to him and we said, okay, we got to do we got to be like the duck. It's out in the pond, paddling like hell, but you can't see it because it's all underwater. And we said, we think we can do this. We think we can get a lot of important people and situations to come to love and endorse and recommend and consume this wonderful whiskey that you've created. And we are willing to put handcuffs on ourselves, that's the two of us, and do it in a way that there are no fingerprints, that manipulation is going on. So it will look like discovery, but in fact, we will be trying to seed discovery in an appropriate, good taste way, always with no fingerprints.
Now you're talking about Russian and fake news, right? This is exactly what it is.
Well, it may sound that way, but a lot of times it's just getting people interested. We tricked them a little bit to want to come to the distillery, and we tricked him to always be there when they were there because they didn't want to see me. They wanted to see the creator. Mm-hmm. And then we just left, and it always worked out well.
It's like a different version of the Parent Trap, right?
Yeah. But that's how we got going. The first time I called Dad, he didn't like to do interviews, and he didn't like to make speeches and stuff. And so
you don't either.
I had a fellow. Well, I've had to. We could never get him in Colonel Sanders' suit, so we had to put me in it. And we had a fellow from the Wall Street Journal that wanted to come down and see the place. I'm not sure how interested he was, but he had agreed to give us a couple of hours or so. And I knew that it would be a couple of hours if it were me. So now my job was, how do I convince Dad to just be there? So I called him up, and I told him I had a fraternity brother of mine coming down to the distillery, would really like to meet him. Then I brought this journalist in, and I knew Dad would be nice when the guy was there, and then he would disown me after it was over, but that was okay.
Yeah.
And they hit it off, and Dave Garino's the guy's name from the Journal, and he stayed 3.5 days with us.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
He stayed 3.5 days with my father, not me.
Yeah.
And he loved every minute of it. And that's, that was a whole light bulb went on. Ooh, they like Dad even though he don't like them so much. Or he didn't like the interference.
What'd y'all do in Loretto for 3 days? Go to
No, I don't know. I wasn't there.
Raywick and
Well, they did go around and visit Bill Peterson, the farmer.
Okay, yeah. Yeah,
And went up and saw Ed O'Daniel, who was working hard to get us city water so we could have enough water, not to make whiskey with, but to do all the non-contact stuff. Just little things to make it look like a little bit of a business, because it really was isolated, and that's been interesting to overcome that.
Yeah. I grew up in Bardstown. I felt like I was isolated there. So yeah, when you go
Bardstown's come of age now.
Oh, now it has, but I guess back in the day, but definitely the past 12 years, it's been an explosion. But
about the last 6 months.
Yeah, but my family's from Howardstown, which is not too far from Loretto and Raywick.
What's your family name? Greenville?
Cecil.
Oh, so okay, yeah.
Yeah, but talk about being in the middle of nowhere. That's, it's just in the middle of nowhere.
But isn't that a beautiful drive?
Oh, it is.
From Howardstown up to Raywick.
It is.
It's a canopy almost the entire way.
Yep, it is. It's absolutely beautiful. If you go in the spring or fall time, there's no prettier setting, in my opinion.
Absolutely right.
You just got to keep your eyes on the road because it's pretty windy.
Because you're in the creek. If you
exactly. No guardrails.
So let's talk about that next phase, right? So at this point, you've got the Times there as the Journal, whatever you said it was, and so the name is starting to get out there. This episode of Bourbon Pursuit is made possible through listeners like you, supported through Patreon, and with partnerships brought to you by the following.
The State of Logic podcast is like no other. We don't have the same focus as so many other podcasts where we're just going to talk about business or politics or whatever. We talk about everything with everyone, intellectuals, comedians, and celebrities alike. Sometimes it's a 20-minute interview. Sometimes it's a 3-hour interview. But at the end of the day, it's a great conversation that we often laugh about and learn something from at the same time. Come check us out at the State of Logic podcast.
The world's biggest bourbon, music, and food festival is back. Bourbon and Beyond 2018 with Sting, John Mayer, Robert Plant, and the Sensational Space Shifters, Lenny Kravitz, Counting Crows, David Byrne, Sheryl Crow, Brian Setzer, Kaleo, Government Mule, Kev Moe, and so much more. Bourbon and Beyond is back. The celebration of the spirit and soul of Kentucky, September 22nd and 23rd at Champions Park. The world's top bourbons, paired with celebrity chefs, Louisville's top restaurants, and iconic musicians. With Sting, John Mayer, Robert Plant, and the Sensational Space Shifters, Lenny Kravitz, and beyond. For all the details, go to bourbonandbeyond.com. Bourbon and Beyond 2018, September 22nd and 23rd at Champions Park.
So let's talk about that next phase, right? So at this point, you've got the Times there as the Journal, whatever you said it was, and so the name is starting to get out there.
Well, it started in one day. It wasn't like any marketing effort.
Right.
It was like after when Mr. Garino went home, he got the story put on the front page of the Journal. That center column they had. And it was the first time the Journal had ever done a profile of a privately held company. And it blew the roof off as far as what's this all about. And so here was the conversation. August 1, 1980. Here it is. And Dad, he said, "That's a nice young man. That was really nice. What are we going to do today?" It was like it was one sentence. I'm thinking, oh, shit. This is going to come along once every 200 years. The question is, how do we make hay out of this? So first thing that happened, we put in more phone lines in the office. We got my two sisters out of retirement. And Dad and I spent every Saturday and every Sunday for almost a full year answering people's inquiries. my job and Mr. Lindsay's job with the agency was to keep the plate spinning until we had some whiskey. Because all of a sudden, almost every good restaurant and bar in the urban areas of the country, the more sophisticated areas, they had to have a bottle. And the fact they couldn't get it made them want to have it twice as much.
Yeah.
So, and we didn't have it, and we weren't going to take everything out of Kentucky to satisfy New York and California. And by then, it had become a very successful brand in Kentucky, but only Kentucky.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, did your dad embrace it whenever you're like, all right, all these orders are coming in? Or
Lindsay and I were sitting there.
Why are you bringing all this to us?
Lindsay and I were sitting, we'll talk about that. I mean, we're sitting there watching his reaction. We said, this will be the moment when he will see that commercialization beyond Kentucky without screwing up the craft is possible. Because the only reason these people are interested is because of his craft, not because of anything we did. And he wants to go get back to the distillery and talk to somebody down there about something or other. I'm thinking, oh shit, what's it gonna take? But once we got going, and we said, Dad, we got to talk to these people. They're talking to us. This is what you said. You said we could talk back to people. We just couldn't initiate the conversation. And they're talking like crazy. I mean, the first week we had over 38,000 letters. And it seemed like that many phone calls. It wasn't, because we only had 5 phone lines, but they were busy constantly. And that's when it started. The way we reacted was as if every interested, frustrated person was the most important person in our universe.
And so these letters and phone calls, are these purchase orders? Are these people just
No. Where the hell
mail?
can I find a bottle?
Yeah.
And the only positive thing we could tell them was, next time you're in or around Kentucky, you got a chance.
Yeah. Now, when this all started coming in, did you have the infrastructure set up to handle it, or were you like, oh God, we got to?
No, we didn't have any distributors hardly. The distributors started coming to us too. The same ones that wouldn't answer the phone now on an airplane coming to Loretta. So that was good, but realistic expectations. But what it did is, when we did get whiskey, they knew the rules. It was going to go out a bottle at a time to the better watering holes.
Right.
And so that helped us, gets the discipline built in before you've actually got any whiskey.
So at what point did operations really start spinning up then to be able to start keeping up with the orders?
Well, we started the next day making, ramp the distillery up as much as we could.
Who wants to get paid overtime this week, right? Yeah.
Well, but it still took 6 years. So the trick sort of was to promise people it's coming and not get trapped into telling them when, because it was going to be a while.
So I guess and I don't want to bring up any bad memories. So let's talk about to the point where your father's passing and you start taking over the business. So kind of talk about that transition.
Well, it wasn't with the passing. When it got to be more business than hobby, he turned it over. He kept the checkbook, but he turned a bit. It's because a lot of it had become external, and with bankers and insurance companies and distributors and the agencies, public relations and advertising.
Yeah. It's
so
more
we
than just
moved
the
my
whiskey at
office
that
to
point,
Louisville,
right? Yeah.
and then he stayed on he was the chairman. He stayed on as really the guardian, because he wasn't positive that he could trust us even at that point, and us being just the two of us, Lindsay and myself. But we really stayed true to what he was looking for. I mean, we didn't. There was no monkey business. There was no aggressive behavior. It was all just talking to and trying to serve people who were trying to talk to us. And for 6 years, of course, we had this horrible shortage.
So kind of talk about when you're taking over, how involved are you with the actual distillation process? Or are you saying like, we're going to hire the right guys, we're going to make sure that...
we had to, because we weren't thick enough in the very early days for me to become Dad's assistant distiller. I mean, my job description when I got here was go find customers. So that's that's what I focused on. So even with all this engineering background, I possibly could have made whiskey in the very early days, but I wouldn't be a chance now. I mean, I've forgotten everything.
So did you have somebody like as an understudy or apprentice, while
No,
there?
Dad had an absolutely wonderful man, Sam Cecil, who had worked
It's a nice name.
for him at the, well, you're probably related.
Probably somehow.
He's got family over in what's that little place, Howardstown,
Yeah.
and he had been with my father at the T.W. Samuels distillery before the Second World War, and Dad got him away from J.W. Dant at just the right time because Sam knew the business. And he was my educator on the technical side. And it's a lot more than making whiskey. I mean, you've got the yeast part of it, you've got the warehouse part of it, and just designing rickhouses was monster. But I learned what I could, but I would have died if he would have passed on.
Did y'all work with the Busick family back then?
Oh, you had to.
With Donald?
Absolutely, Donald Sr., sure.
Yeah, Donald Sr., yeah. My best friend, Lincoln, that was his grandfather. I'm friends with the family, but...
Well, they're the best. I mean, without
actually
them,
going
we
to
wouldn't have an
interview
industry.
Yeah.
I mean, and they've really maintained a monopoly through this whole thing because they've never rested on their laurels. They're constantly improving the process. They can throw one of those things up now. 50,000 barrels, they can throw it up in 3 months.
I've seen them on Bardstown Road with those Heaven
Isn't
Hill
that
ones.
something?
You're like one day there's nothing, and
That's
you
right.
come back 2 months later, it's 3 damn 50,000 barrel warehouses.
It's
amazing.
impressive.
Yeah.
So talk about the growth of where Makers was when you brought Rob into this as well, right? So you brought Rob in at some point, or how did you groom him into kind of taking over a lot of your role, right? Because he's very much like you, right? Not more like his grandfather, where he's not like in the thick of it. He's more of the books, back office, the kind of the leadership role.
He had the benefit, and it was a great benefit, of when he was in high school, he actually worked at the distillery and stayed with his grandparents in Bardstown, even though we were living in Louisville. Now, Dad had kind of retired then, but he got a dose. Every night they'd talk about it, or they'd go over, and Rob would have a question, and so he learned from his grandfather, which was the right one to learn from, because that was the founder. And he spent 2 really valuable summers working over at the distillery when he was in high school. And then when I brought him in, I insisted that he go do something right out of college that was different.
Internship at the White House or something.
Well, they didn't invite him. Our favorite senator, John Sherman Cooper, had passed on, so he didn't have that opportunity. But he went out, worked in the industry, got a job, and did really, really well. He was out for 10 years, and brought him back. He was with us, I think, 6 years, and then we worked side by side for 1 year, which meant that he did 90% and I did 10% and was just available. And then when I retired, he asked if I wouldn't just hang around, that he'd give me all the free whiskey I needed.
You'd be like, I was going to get that anyway, right?
Well, I'm not so sure. They've tightened up some of the stuff around here.
Even you're on allocation.
I'm on allocation. Isn't that terrible?
Oh, man. So do you get, I mean, so we're here in the office in Louisville, right? Like when you go back to Loretto and because you've been around it for almost your whole life now, right? I mean, you've been around it for years and years. And so when you ever go back to Loretto, do you kind of just stand around and look and say, just take it all in, or just in awe sometimes of how much it's grown from where you were
Doing
in the
personality test to now.
Exactly.
Yeah, all is the right word. What is the most meaningful is not that it's grown, but how it's grown. And there's not another distillery in the world that's imposed the discipline around how production occurs. than we have. I mean, it's the same size operation. We're just making more mashes exactly the same way. We struggle with water. My God, I hate to think that tens of millions of dollars we spent on conservation just to be able to make our whiskey from spring water there on site. And the amount of partnerships we've had with the Peterson family. I mean, they started out as our grain supplier. They had 100 acres. Dad said, we're going to form a partnership. We're going to go forward. They got 17,000 acres now. It's been a great partnership.
We lease some acres. My family leases some acres in Howardstown to them.
Do you?
Peterson's, yeah.
They're something, aren't they?
Oh, it's a huge operation. It's,
People go through Loretta and they see all those elevators and silos. They say, my God, I think I'm in Iowa. I said, that's only half of it.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
So you're somewhat retired now, right? I mean, that's you try to take in retirement, but you're here at the office with us today. So what's your idea of being still involved and then also kind of enjoying your retirement?
Well, the number one job is not getting away. And going back to the personality test, that ain't easy.
Yeah, I was going to say, how easy is that for you?
It's not easy at all. But what's made it easy is that Rob's done such an unbelievable job. Almost from he's got a really good ear about the business, all pieces of the business. And I was amazed. I thought, man, I'm going to have to learn to bite my lip. I'm going to have to sit down and grunt and not yell and scream. And it never happened. And I give him a lot more credit than I do myself, because I have yet to take in the first suppository.
That's all. So, like, who is the go-to for the vision now? You know, because your parent company's Beam Suntory. Do they go to your son for that vision, or are they kind of create, or how's that work?
It's all him.
All him. Okay.
Yeah, the vision is it, and I with me, and I was a little more of a bulldog, so I figured get it or get out of the way. Even though there was a parent company about half of the years, and they kind of got out of the way, so I figured that's the way you do it. Rob's a whole lot more sophisticated and much better at bringing the right people, all the people into the vision, but he is absolutely the creator of the go-forward vision for this brand, and it's been nice. It's been really... If I'd have known it was that easy to get people's support around a good idea, I'd have spent more time being nice.
Make more people.
Yeah.
Was it the honey and vinegar thing? Or,
Yeah.
Hindsight's 20/20.
Yeah, all vinegar.
Yeah.
So I think one thing we did accidentally kind of skip over was part of the innovation that you were involved with in making Maker's Mark what it is today. So you had a staple product for a very, very long time, and then from what I understand is that Maker's 46 was kind of like your brainchild, right?
That was my baby. Well, and Kevin Smith, who was our master distiller at the time, it was the two of us. And we didn't tell anybody what we were doing because we didn't want to ruin Kevin's career if this screwed up. I was about ready to retire, so it didn't make any difference about me.
You can fire me tomorrow. I got enough saved away.
But the idea was pretty simple. It was gee whiz, we have spent all this time trying to take the heavy lifting Mom and Dad did in the early years and commercialize it, because that was go find customers. That was my job description. I never bothered to look around and say, is there another job description? Because that's what I essentially did for 45 years. And I went to Kevin and I said, how about you and I just secretly going off and see, before I retire, I've got a year and a half till I retire, Rob's going to take over. He's going to be fine. Why don't we just see if we can create what my version of Maker's Mark might be? I've got a couple of things that if I were doing it, I'd have done it a little differently. Not much, but a little. And the one thing that was sacred between Dad and I was, it had to be yummy. All the flavor needed to be in the front half of the palate.
That's quite the description.
That's a good
character.
flavor profile.
Yeah.
I like it. That's my kind of language.
Well, and people like stuff that tastes good. And the stuff that tastes good is in the front half of your palate. In spite of all these whiskey geeks that try to convince you this acquired taste is something really important. Well, if it tastes bad the first time, it's probably going to taste bad the second and third and fourth time, but they make a living doing that, so that's okay. But I said, well, I think it needs to be yummy, but we could intensify the nose and the flavor a bit. That would be interesting. No idea how to do it, but that would be nice, I thought. And the other thing is, what if we could add a long finish with no bitter aftertaste? Now, of course, that's an oxymoron because a long finish and bitter are the same thing. So we weren't worried about that. We were just worried about what would winning look like. And that was the definition of winning. Had to be yummy, all flavor in the front half, a little more intensity, like Makers on steroids, and a long finish with no bitter aftertaste. How do we do it?
Is that part of the business proposal plan, like Makers on steroids? Is that line
no,
one?
I've still got the sheet of paper we did.
Oh, yeah?
We said, nobody's going to see this but us, so let's just, let's be us.
Yeah.
And let's keep it so we're communicating in plain English. Because eventually we're going to have to hand this off to somebody to help us do it, for sure. And we screwed around with stuff, and it wasn't working. Different barrels with different flavors from other spirits and things. So we went up to see Brad Boswell, who is the owner of Independent Stave, who has made our barrels these 60 years, he and his family. And we asked him. He said, here, what do you think? We showed him our little sheet of paper with the 3 criteria on it, 10 words. Can you help us, Brad? He said, no. Well, shit, I'm folding it up, ready to leave. And he said, but my sister might be able to help you. And she runs the half of the business out in California that makes wine barrels. Well, also, they have, over the years, they've developed a competency, the industry competency for flavor staves for wine. And the vintners are very interested in subtle flavors and not so much interested in getting those flavors from other spirits, but getting them from how the wood is cooked. So it's a virgin process. That we were fascinated by it, and they had PhDs and biologists and wood chefs, they call them all, and they had millions of dollars tied up in these ovens. And they had all the research findings from 20 years of cooking American oak, French oak, the 2 versions of French oak, and European oak in different ways. And they had samples. And so we played just to get an idea of what could be created. Remember, we're talking about low-proof spirit. It'd never been tried with a high-proof spirit. So we weren't sure the analogy made any sense. They weren't sure, but they were willing to try. And so we went back to doing our business and almost forgot about them. And they sent us a sample the Thanksgiving before I retired in June and said, try this. It was perfect. How'd you do it? And then they told us they used French oak. We said, oh, shit, now we can't call it bourbon. And then we found out we could call it bourbon because it becomes bourbon before you install the French oak, and therefore the issue is, has it been disqualified? And it hasn't. So, but that's how we got there. And then we, ran into the issues, oh, my God, now we got to have a package and a name and all this stuff. Yeah. And so that's where the agency came back in, and Beam came back in and helped us. But before that, it was Kevin and I. Yeah. Until we took those samples, to a bunch of people and said, try this. And we got what we were looking for, which is, wow.
That's amazing.
And we're still getting it.
I think I remember a funny story that you said about, like, your name used to be on the label, but now it's like on the back or like almost coming off.
No, it's not there at all.
It's not there at all anymore?
No, see, well, it's part of it. And this was more of a joke than anything. I told Kevin, our master distiller that helped me, was that, now really, Kevin, the reason we have to do this is when Rob comes in, the first thing he's going to do is take my name off the maker's side of the bottle and put his on there. Well, that's exactly what he did. And I said, I got to have some legacy around here. I've been here 50 years. I mean, you got to show some respect for old people. But that was a little bit of a joke. So when we did the packaging, I told the package design firm, I said, you just pretend you're my mother. And then I spent an hour describing her idiosyncrasy. She was really smart, and she had really good taste. And we just talked about her. And then I said, now your job is to pretend you're her, and this is her second encore. So, and they came back, we didn't change a thing. And then the other thing I told them was no paper anywhere on the label.
Why?
Well, I wouldn't tell them. I said, you just do what I say, and then come on back, and then I'll tell you why no paper. So they came back, and I said, cause I don't want to have to put my name on this and then Rob take the damn paper off and put his name on. So we're going to etch my name in the glass, on the back of the glass. And we did it, and it's still there. And I've been retired 6.5 years now.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome.
It's too big a pain in the ass to change, bottling up.
Oh, it is.
Versus labeling.
Oh, I knew that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, good. I mean, I think we've definitely hit a lot of the things that we wanted to know about the history of you, where you've been with Makers, kind of like how you've led it from what your dad's idea was into the vision where it has really come into a global brand today, right? Do you have a few more minutes we can talk about I kind of want to get your ideas about the industry as well. So what's like kind of your overall thought process of where it's becoming in the past 6 years until where it is today, and then kind of where do you see it going in another 6 to 10 years?
Well, I like what I see. Now remember, I had early time spent in Napa, going to Berkeley, and we spent a lot of weekends up there. Sonoma didn't exist at the time, and the only way we got in the wineries was Dad had to call them to get us in, because they weren't open for tours back in the early 60s. But I could see, as people started to make investments in California wine, the type of people that were making those investments. The two varieties, craftsmen and hobbyists. And
rich bankers or old hedge fund guys.
But they had a lot of passion.
Yeah.
I mean, they brought money with them. They had made it not unlike the thoroughbred industry in Lexington, those wonderful horse farms, but you had enough craftsmen to keep the focus where it needed to be. And I'm seeing exactly the same thing here with our 17 or 1,500 craft distilleries that have actually started in the last 4 years. I don't know all of them, but I probably talked to 1,000. Mm-hmm. Okay. And it's a pretty good group. They're smart. They're young. About half of them are well-funded. Half of the rest of them will figure out how to make it work. The other half will die. And that's pretty good odds.
That's a lot of halves, by the way, Bill.
Well, but I mean, I go back to 1953 when everybody was down. All the old smart people thought they had the way forward with bourbon was just do more of what you'd always done. And it wasn't working. Now there's a new, different ideas. And as everybody, the first thing out of anybody's mouth is, oh, we got a bubble coming. Let me tell you why I don't think so. I mean, we may have some short-term stuff. Number one, we never had this many smart young people in the business as we've got now. Smart people are more flexible. Young people are more flexible. They'll figure a lot of this out, okay? But the big reason is it took Mom and Dad, it took Booker Noe with the not the single barrel, the
small batch.
Yeah, the small batch collection.
Yeah.
And it took Ferdy Falk and Bob Baranaskas at Buffalo Trace. It was called something else then. With their single barrel, it took what Mom and Dad did and what those two folks did to really hook up connoisseurship with bourbon. We couldn't have done it by ourselves. No way. We were first by 30 years or so. But before Makers, bourbon was swill and Scotch was swell. Mm-hmm. We now are positioned in the minds of the public all around as an equal top shelf contender to Scotch and more approachable. Flavor and reputation.
It actually tastes good.
It actually tastes good. Well, but that's for the individual to decide.
Right.
So now, for the first time, and this has just been in the last, I'm going to say 10 years, bourbon is poised to compete with Scotch, with the better Scotches. And for every bottle of fine bourbon sold, there's 10 bottles of fine Scotch sold. It's a great position to be in, and we're just now starting to penetrate the global markets in a meaningful way.
So when you talk about that sales mentality, right? The one thing that I've always liked about bourbon is that it is a common man's entry point, right? A $35 bottle, a $45 bottle for a really good bourbon. When you get into a really good Scotch, you're in the $100, $150s.
Yeah, but they don't sell. I'm talking about the stuff that sells.
Oh, exactly. But
this is a business, remember?
But then there's also the characteristics of supply and demand. When demand is really high and supply is really good, we could raise price and be able to make a few extra bucks.
Well, that's
right?
tactical pricing. I think you'll see a lot of the smart people pricing strategically through the valley, through the highs and lows, because the game is to beat Scotch. The game is not today's short-term exploitation of a shortage.
I mean, do you? So you think you're thinking more long-term strategy?
You got to.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, how can you be in this business if you don't? Because what you make today, you can't sell for 6 or 7 years.
I mean, if you would know better than I mean, is there a good conglomeration where the heads of all you top ones get into the back corner, and it's kind of like if you think about like AT&T and Time Warner all trying to figure out how do we charge the right price for our cable bill, right? I mean, how do you figure out what's the good going rate?
Well, the way you figure out what's on people's minds is how much skin they're putting in the game. Look who's investing, how are they investing, and every smart person I know is investing, and they've all got different brand equities and different ideas. All of them go toward owning more of this mouth share that's traditionally belonged to fine Scotch. You said something really interesting about the poor man's entry into. Okay, when I was a kid, the poor man's entry was a $2.99 fifth of bourbon,
right?
And it was on the bottom shelf of a liquor store, which meant that as they mopped their store, there was mop markings all over the label of this stuff. I mean, those days are gone.
Yes.
I mean, not only the $2.99, but the people that are drinking bourbon. It's a pretty young, sophisticated market,
right? And that's why I said I think the average consumer is not going to shy away at a $35 bottle, and even that, I mean, the classification of a super premium bourbon was at one point, what, 50 plus bucks, 65 bucks, right? And I think that's now going to start stretching up into the $150 range, right? So we can see that there are other distilleries that are trying to push that envelope, push the price points, but it's still not in the regards of the high price that you can get in some rare scotches that are in the $1,000 marks, right?
Yeah, a lot of those are for investment and trading.
And do you see a reason
Kind
why?
of like Bitcoin.
Yeah, there you go. Do you see a reason?
Speculation.
Do you see a reason why bourbon couldn't get to that? Why shouldn't bourbon start getting to the point where you can think of a reason to create a $1,000 bottle that is a trading a collector's item or whatever?
Well, I think that'll be one more indication that we've arrived at reputation parity to Scotch.
Mm-hmm. So you think it's a good thing that'll get there, right? Because I
think it's one of the
puts
pieces.
You on a level.
Yeah, we're already at the level. It blows out horizontally, and that would be one of the pieces that you'd want to check off. Do we have anybody putting $1,000 bourbons in really fine crystal, and is anybody buying them? Mm-hmm. And if the answer is yes, then check that one off and move forward.
So another kind of idea about the market. So, you mentioned about craft a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I was talking about price points and craft. When you look at what craft is putting on the market today, I have yet to find a craft bottle of whiskey that's under $50, right? Most of them are towering around 80 to 100. But when you look at the big dogs in the industry is that they typically have a very good solid product for a much lesser price point. What problem or what niche do you think craft is solving in the market today, or do you think maybe it's a little bit ahead of its time?
No, it's not ahead of its time. If you've got 1,500 new distilleries in 4 years, and it's a business that's very difficult to enter.
So I think when I think of like the craft beer market, right? Like the craft
it's a
beer
lot
market,
easier to enter that market than it is ours.
No,
it's
I
not
do,
close.
but I think they also had the opportunity when everything was like it was all light beers, right? And then you have IPAs, you got stouts, you got all these different things, right? Where the bourbon market is, you had, for better or lack of term, you had a lot of really good aged stock that is now getting out there and it's creating a viral sensation and people are loving what's there. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to figure out, do you really think that where craft can come in and play an interesting role, that it's fulfilling a need that's not there today with inside the whiskey market?
Well, one is local pride, state pride. Take a place like Colorado and Texas where everybody wears their ego on their sleeve.
Yeah.
If it's
hook 'em horns, right?
If it's not made in Texas, we ain't buying it.
Yeah.
So I mean that's a pretty big market in itself. Mm-hmm. Although I do think several of the craft bourbon distilleries have moved beyond the glass ceiling of state pride. So they're doing something right. I mean, you got people that don't have all the baggage coming into the business. They got bills and they got obligations and they got investment, but they don't have history. History works both ways.
Right.
Yeah, it's just, because Kenny might have been alluding to this. For me, it seems like it's hard for, like, I'm not going to go spend $60, $70 on a 2-year craft whiskey.
Well, you know too much.
Yeah, exactly. That's true.
Okay, well, that's
point.
easy.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But, when people are just getting into it, I give them recommendations of, the $20, $30, and then they're blown away by that. And I just find it hard to believe that selling at these higher price points and the product not delivering is going to create continued success, I guess.
As the market gets more sophisticated, capitalism will work its remedies. It always does.
Yeah.
If we can just stay out of the way of trying not to tell people what to do. Let them figure it out on their own, and they will.
Perhaps you need to create Bill Samuels consulting services where you go and you try to figure out how do we create the sales for all these craft distillers, right?
I get a lot of calls, and most of them, I got to tell you, are disappointed at how few silver bullets I have. Mm-hmm. I mean, they really are. They're fun people. I enjoy talking to them. And
you just tell them to go get customers.
That's all Dad told me. God damn it, go figure it out.
Sell.
Yeah. Well, no, you got to figure out the right way, and that took some years to go in a way that Dad would feel comfortable, and he wasn't going to turn the keys over unless he was comfortable, because this really was like a child to him.
Mm-hmm. And plus, you're not going to let Doe Anderson go, help these other,
That's a good point. No, why would we want to do that?
Yeah, exactly. That might be your silver bullet.
It could be. So we talked about where the industry's trending. We talked about the history. We talked about a lot of these good things. And I think this is probably a good point to kind of wrap it up, because you've expelled a lot of good information about, like I said, how you came and helped you grow the business to where it is today. And I think we're excited to see where Makers can be in the future, right? Everybody's always hyped to, when Maker's Mark Castrate came out, like everybody really want to get on that train. And then when everybody has the opportunity to jump on to get a Maker's 46 private blend, everybody loves doing those as well.
Those are awesome.
That's just been wonderful watching that happen.
Yeah, that's brought
and see,
me
that
back
was
to
an
Makers,
that was an extension of 46. Jane Boyd, my father, or my son Rob, walked into my office and said, "Okay, this is your 50th anniversary here. What's been the most fun in 50 years?" And I just didn't hesitate. Creating 46 was by far the most fun.
Mm-hmm. 1 year before the retirement, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, we worked on it a couple of years before that, and Jane said, "So what you did is you created your own version of Maker's Mark." I said, "Yes." They said, "What if what if we could find a way to give some of our better customers an opportunity to create their own preferred version of Maker's Mark?
You say as long as my name's still etched in the glass?
Well, I think they took it off on the private select because I didn't have anything to do with it. And so that's how that happened. And it created we had to find different solutions than just the 46 seared French oak slats. Mm-hmm. I mean, they had to have different flavor profiles, and they tested hundreds and hundreds and got it down to 5. They've got a couple that they might add now, but that gives you several thousand solutions. So everybody that does a private select at Maker's Mark, they get to pay a lot of money, and then they get to have something nobody else has.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, I've heard.
And they get to flavor it up. It's always going to be in the maker's DNA. The only thing we ask is that it not go where the geeks want it to go, which is way back in the mouth. They will get over that, and everybody's going to get stuck with an awful lot of bitter whiskey.
Well, good deal. So, Bill, I want to say thank you again for coming on the show today. It was a pleasure to talk to you and everything like that. If people just need to pay attention to see, maybe on social media, you'll be coming to their city and talking about something. So it's probably the best way that they can find you, right?
Absolutely.
Good deal. So if you like the show, make sure you support us on Patreon, patreon.com/Bourbon Pursuit. Subscribe on iTunes. Go write a review. Go follow us on social media, Facebook's, Twitter, and Instagram. I was about to say Snapchat, but I was like, we're not on Snapchat.
We're too old for that.
Yeah, and at Bourbon Pursuit.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you have any show suggestions, comments, feedback, just let us know what you want to hear, and we'll keep bringing you this content. So appreciate you listening, and we'll see you next time.